ready. All right, Jonathan.
Recording.
Whenever you're ready.
And action.
Good afternoon. I want you to picture the last time that you were in a history class.
Oh.
Exactly. Most of the time, the words that come to mind are tedious and boring, and unless you absolutely love history, which some of us do, it tends to be a place that not a lot of people are excited about. But what if I told you that across America right now, thousands of people are learning history while they're on vacation? That's right. Across America, people like these are actually some of the most engaged consumers of history. And I know that because I see it at work every single day. My name is Jonathan Smith, and I am a self-proclaimed history fanatic, but I'm also interested in business and hospitality. And this led me to an investigation into how heritage tourism can help preserve historic artifacts and locations. Every single day at the Durango and Silverton Narrow Gauge Railroad, I work as a brakeman, and my job is the safety of the train. But I'll be walking down the aisle, and a passenger will stop me and say, "What is that building on the side of the tracks?" And I'll start answering their questions. Suddenly, 40 people around me are all wondering the same thing, and they're listening to my mini history lecture that I'm giving. And it got me wondering why over 300,000 people every single year take a ride on this railroad. Is it because of the beautiful scenery? Is it because of the history? Why is this story repeated across America, all over the world, in fact? That led to an investigation into the heritage tourism industry. And in order to study how heritage attractions can take advantage of tourism, first we have to understand why historic attractions are visited by people. Why do people choose to include a historic attraction on their vacation? That can lead into a study into how heritage attractions can take advantage of tourism to grow their numbers and accomplish their goal of historic preservation. Why do people travel to historic places? I found that there's actually three reasons why people visit historic attractions, three different mindsets that people have when they go. The first is fairly obvious. They want an educational experience. That's a picture of the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. It's an international example. It's a religious site, but it's also the most visited attraction in Israel. And in a study completed in 2000 where they interviewed people as they were leaving the site, over half of them stated that the main reason why they visited was that it was a historic attraction and they wanted to learn something. That's fairly obvious to me. I thought, yes, people would visit a historic site to learn something, to get an education. But the other two actually surprised me. Unique. This one is really important. They want a unique experience. When people travel, they want to do something that's different from their normal lives. They want to do something that's out of the ordinary, something real and different from their normal way of life. You'll see that's a picture of Route 66. It was the main transportation link between Chicago and Los Angeles during the boom of the interstate system. And in a study completed in 2003, they started studying why people decided to travel on Route 66. What were the reasons why people took this 3,000-mile-long road trip? And they concluded that traveling Route 66 seemed to represent an escape from the corporate ubiquitous presence that dominates their everyday lives and landscapes and consumer experiences. It led them to something that was not generic or monotonous. Those are really important. People don't want to feel generic or monotonous. They want to feel like they're part of something bigger. And so that leads us into the next one, which is authenticity and meaningful. People want an authentic and meaningful experience. Authenticity is really important. They want something real, something tangible that they can feel, touch, hear, see, and be a part of. And meaning is actually something that's given to every single tourist attraction regardless of the genre. That's why I have a picture of a cruise ship there. Cruise companies work so hard to give their attraction meaning. The meaning that they give it is relaxation, fun, excitement, travel, things like that. But on the contrary, Mount Vernon, the home of George Washington, the first president of the United States, that meaning is already there and it's inherent because of the past. The attraction that's historic has meaning inherent because it's a place where something meaningful happened. And so they don't have to work to give their attraction meaning. It just is there and they have to prove it to people. That's the key. They have to prove that it's historic and meaningful and authentic. But they don't have to spend the money to make it that way. That's what sets cruise ships apart. Only 20% of America's population have actually gone on a cruise, with 50% of them having thought about it. half of America hasn't even considered a cruise. Yet, when we start studying the statistics on historic tourism, we see that it's far different. Over 81% of America's 146 annual tourists have visited a historic attraction. They can be considered heritage tourists. That's amazing. That's according to the United States Department of Commerce. The government actually started studying this trend because it increased over the past 10 to 15 years. The National Trust for Historic Preservation defines heritage tourism as traveling to experience the places and artifacts and activities that authentically represent the past and help preserve it. So that's the definition of heritage tourism, and when you compare it to other forms of tourism, it happens in pretty much every single vacation. In a study completed on the state of Florida in 2000, they found that Florida actually sees $3.7 billion in heritage tourism alone. And that also contributes over 100,000 jobs to the tourism industry. That could be a whole talk all on its own, because that means that 100,000 people are now being paid to preserve history. They can dedicate their entire career and their lives to preserving historic artifacts and locations. Heritage tourism makes that possible in the state of Florida. In Swanee County, one of the leaders in this, they have 3 different heritage attractions that they advertise. One of them is their historic museum. And Swanee County actually levied a bed tax. So when you go as a tourist and you spend money there, you pay a 10% bed tax, and they collect over $40,000 in grant money and marketing money for historic attractions. So the government is actually helping historic attractions pay for their historic preservation. It's a direct link between people visiting the historic location, the community, and preserving history. Right here at home in the state of Colorado, in 2003, the most recent study, we saw 5.1 million heritage trips. When you think about it, that is an extremely high amount compared to all the other states, because Colorado's home to a number of different heritage attractions, not just railroads, but historic districts and shopping districts, lots of different museums and national parks, all found within one state. That's 5.1 million trips out of just about 10 million trips. So that's half of Colorado's tourists can be considered heritage tourists. In that same year, heritage tourism brought in $3.4 billion in a tourist economy. And that's almost 1/3 of the $10.9 billion generated. So heritage tourism is an incredible economic driver for the 2 studies that I found. I found a number of different states in my research, but Florida and Colorado, heritage tourism was a major economic driver for their tourism economies. Overall, heritage tourism statistics show that heritage tourism plays a key part in communities that embrace it. Heritage visitors spend on average $615 per person, compared to $425 for the average tourist. That can be for a number of reasons, but the main one is that heritage attractions can charge higher admission prices than other forms of of tourism, because they're providing something that's authentic and meaningful, and people are willing to pay for it. They're willing to take some tour groups and visit historic restaurants and things like that. On the same thread, heritage travelers are more likely to spend an average of 1 night longer at a destination than the average U.S. traveler. Think of Mesa Verde, another local example. It takes a full day just to do one trip, one tour out there and make sure that you visit their museum. And people are willing to spend time in a community if what they're experiencing is authentic, meaningful, and educational. It's really important to show that heritage tourism plays a key part in communities. When communities embrace tourism, the heritage attractions benefit from that. The more money flowing through a heritage attraction, the better. People are paying for admission prices. People are paying restaurants and hotels. Embracing tourism is really important. So this leads to my recommendations for heritage attractions. These are the things I believe heritage attractions aren't doing well right now, and they need to take advantage of. They need to take advantage of heritage tourism, and these are the ways that they can do it. Right now, heritage attractions only advertise as an educational opportunity. A lot of places that are historic say, we're an educational experience, we can teach you something, please come and learn that. And that works for a lot of people. But that doesn't work for everybody. They're not tapping into the rest of the tourism market there. They're only tapping into the small group of people who are willing to spend the money on heritage attractions. And so instead, sometimes they don't advertise at all. Sometimes they actually don't advertise, they rely on word of mouth and a sandwich board outside of their attraction to get people in. They need to break down those barriers and advertise completely as an educational, unique, authentic, and meaningful experience. Those words invoke a sense of travel for people. They invoke the kinds of feelings that you want to have when you travel. And that gets the average tourist through the door. That's what lots of tourist attractions have embraced that make a lot of money. And more small museums in small towns and even larger like forts and historic monuments need to take advantage of that. Oh, it went back. There we go. Therefore, heritage attractions have to advertise in a number of different ways. This is an example of a local population center. Lots of different heritage attractions are in small towns, and they think, wow, we're a half-hour drive from anywhere. Why would anybody come visit us? We'll rely on those history buffs. But that's just not the case. If people in local communities want to travel, they're going to do it in their backyards to save money. And so if you advertise in local population centers, you're going to start seeing a lot of different growth in the number of visitors and the type of visitors that you see. Lots of children. This happens right here in Durango. Rail Events Incorporated does the Polar Express. And we make that history of the Durango and Silverton tangible and real for young children across Albuquerque, Denver, the local population centers. The Titanic Museum in Pigeon Forge is actually in the middle of nowhere. Pigeon Forge is one of the most visited tourist attraction or tourist towns in America. And instead of just a room filled with Titanic artifacts where you walk around and view those, you're given the name of a passenger when you walk in. And you spend the entire time in the museum as that passenger, learning what your experience was on the Titanic, and then at the end you figure out whether you survived or perished on the Titanic. You actually touch a chunk of the iceberg that they've preserved, and you see the exhibits. They make it real and tangible. That's the takeaway from that. They want you to feel like you're a part of that history, not just reading it off of a screen or an informational slide. Tourism, therefore, has to be the sustainable funding stream for historic locations. When you are a historic location and you only rely on donations from your visitors and donations from your members of your historical organization, suddenly you can only cater to those people, and you're only catering to history buffs. It's just this long thread of only catering to people who like history. And everything you do has to be with the goal of getting donations and membership. But if you broaden your spectrum and the heritage attractions open up to other forms of tourists and other forms of visitors, they can suddenly widen everything that they do and accomplish their goal in a much more comprehensive way. And this is a part of the community. They need to embrace themselves as part of a community and use these local community members to do that. Have the community members embrace tourism as well. When a community starts seeing numbers of visitors, suddenly you'll see more name brand hotels and restaurants, and the community as a whole benefits. When a community embraces tourism, these heritage attractions embrace it, if that makes sense. So that brings up the negative side of tourism. There's different sides of tourism. There's lots of different negative sides, and I'll touch on those a little later, but this one is really important when it comes to heritage attractions, and that's a term I'm trying to coin, the Disney effect. Basically, when you go to Disneyland, you're not experiencing real history. It's commercialized. It's a rose-colored version of what they're trying to show you. Everything you see is polished and perfect, and it works for a theme park. It absolutely works for a theme park. People want to feel clean and comfortable and excited and things like that, but that doesn't work for heritage attractions. And this is the reason why a lot of heritage attractions don't embrace tourism. They don't want to over-commercialize. They don't want to feel like they're, for lack of a better term, selling out. They want their attraction to be real and authentic. When you go to Disneyland and you walk into Frontierland, you're not experiencing a real frontier town like Animas Forks. Not everybody can visit Animas Forks. It's at 11,000 feet, but it's a real representation of an American ghost town. Everybody visits Frontierland, but back in the Old West, streets weren't paved. I mean, it's a very different kind of history. You're really not learning frontier history when you visit there. So a lot of people are hesitant to do this, but there has to be a balance between a rose-colored version of history and a polished version of history for people. They're still tourists. They still want to experience something professional and organized and clean, but they don't want to lose that real, authentic history that you're trying to show, because that's what makes heritage attractions so important and so interesting to people. The other downsides of tourism, you see destruction of property up there on the top. Those are some Inca ruins, and the oil from our hands, this happens at Mesa Verde too, the oil on our hands makes the rocks black. And people will also step off the trail and they'll knock over walls and they'll loot and take things that they find. That's a real downside that further research needs to go into. A lot of heritage attractions are hesitant to embrace tourism because they don't want their site to be open to just anybody. They want people who care about it. That's a fine balance too. On the bottom, that's cryptobiotic soil in Utah. Tourists in Arches National Park will step off the trail to get the perfect photo with their family, but they'll destroy the living organism that's taken thousands of years to develop and grow. So that's a lot of reasons why people are hesitant to embrace tourism, and further research needs to go into that area. Further research also needs to go into attraction of younger generations to heritage attractions. It's really hard to get young people involved in history. I've been finding that out through my research, and I think that getting younger people involved is an important way to embrace tourism. They will be more open to embracing marketing strategies like social media and newer events like wine and beer festivals at an old historic fort, things like that. I want to end with this quote: "We are all the guardians of history. The best way to preserve history is to make its presentation so interesting and exciting that people will pay a fair price for the experience." That's by the owner of the Durango and Silverton, Al Harper. And what he means is that preservation of history is so important to America. That's part of what I talked about in my paper. It's vital for communities' quality of life to have their historic places survive. But the only way to do that is to make it accessible for people, to make people want to come and see it. And they do. They just don't know it. Every single day they walk by historic locations, and because they don't feel like it'll be an interesting, meaningful, and exciting experience for them, they walk right by it and they don't dish out the money for that admission price, which helps preserve the valuable and irreplaceable history inside that attraction. We're all the guardians of history, and it's up to those of us that preserve it to make it possible for people to see. Thank you.